Welcome to Season 9 of the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast. This is where we chat with experts in the field, patients who use these devices, physical therapists, and the vendors who make it all happen. Our goal? To share stories, tips, and insights that ultimately help our patients get the best possible outcomes. Tune in and join the conversation. We are thrilled you are here and hope it is the highlight of your day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joris Peels, and this is another episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright. How you doing, Brent?
Hey, Joris. I'm doing well, man. Do you know what today is?
No.
I think it's a milestone, actually.
Okay.
And even our guest doesn't know that it's a milestone, but
okay.
I'm super excited to get to him. But today marks the 100th episode of the Orthotics and Prosthetics Podcast.
Wow. I never thought we'd get here.
So that means you can listen to Joris and Brent for 4 days straight.
Oh, wow.
That sounds like torture.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody's out there doing all that. But some of it, maybe some of it.
Here's some crazy stuff. I don't know what's going on other than people are really looking for orthotics and prosthetic stuff.
Uh-huh.
But we're starting to see a snowball in the statistics for the Orthotic and Prosthetic Podcast. So last week, just alone, we had 400 downloads, and we didn't even upload a podcast last week. So that means that essentially for the orthotic and prosthetic industry, that's a very niche industry. We're literally talking to a room full of 400 people every single week, and I think that's really neat.
That's cool, dude. I think yeah, it's good. There's not a lot of passengers. You know what I mean? If we're doing a podcast on baseball or whatever, we can have a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about or whatever, but there's not a lot of, tire kicking people listening to orthotics and prosthetics podcast, pretty much you got a pretty solid kind of understanding of what you're doing, and you're probably involved in this industry, right?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that was just interesting to me is that 40% of our listeners come from outside of the United States.
Yeah, that's crazy. I thought it'd be more American, frankly, as well, all the time.
Yeah.
So I thought that also surprised me that so many people are like listening to us from so many different places all over the place, where in America, you really see this 3D printing specifically in prosthetics, which we talk about that a lot here. That's growing,
Yeah.
And in a lot of other places, there's not a lot of people pushing it. Like there's some places in Europe and stuff, but there's a lot of other international places where people are kind of wanting to pioneer this and be the first in Colombia or New Zealand or whatever to really like kind of lead the charge in their country, right?
Right. And we here's another crazy statistic. We added another 3 countries, so 102 countries. People in 102 countries have listened to the Orthotics Prosthetic Podcast. That it's just crazy. And who would have thought that 2 years ago that would have started that? And so I think it's neat. What a milestone! And today is there's a reason why this guest is on the podcast today as well. And I know that he doesn't really care to think about that like that, but you'll see. I mean, it literally changed the trajectory of my career when I started interacting with him. But before we get to that, we do have a sponsor for the Orthotics and Prosthetics Podcast.
Okay. Who's that?
You would never guess it, but it is Advanced.
Is it Advanced 3D? Is it Advanced 3D?
Right. So Advanced 3D is the sponsor of really this season. Yeah. And Advanced 3D is contract manufacturer. We want to meet you where you are, wherever your journey is, whether you're just scanning, whether you're wanting to get into 3D printing, whether you're wanting to do definitive sockets. If you have a product that you want to bring to market, those are all things that we are good at doing. And so definitely check us out there.
We also do design work for people, right? You can help me literally if I have an idea, if I need some part made that's like some assembly part or something like that, you guys can help me design, do DFAM, design for additive manufacturing, get that thing made, right?
Get it made and get it ready for 3D printing. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that I think that plays to our strength is that we can take a part and get it ready for 3D printing. There's a lot of parts that are not ready for 3D printing because they're made for traditional CNC or injection molding, and make it either difficult or not the right application for 3D printing. And that's where we can come in and help and get you to, say, a production level before you cut a mold or something like that.
Okay, super cool. Now, so I'm super intrigued about our guest, Brent. So who are we talking to?
Yeah. So we are talking to Dale Perkins from Coyote Design and Coyote Prosthetics. And Dale and Matt, we've had Matt on the podcast before, are the founders of Coyote Design. And then they also have a clinical arm as well. And this is a story, whether Dale remembers it or not, but it was a tipping point in my life as a career or as a clinician. Is in 2000, I believe it was 2005. AOPA would do these things called short courses, and so you would like fly in and you would go in for 2 days, and there was a specific technique that you would learn. And I saw this on the internet, and I was a newly certified clinician, or I was still in residency. I don't remember which one. And I saw this thing called the RCR socket from Coyote, and it was the goofiest thing I had ever seen. It had some trim lines that I had never seen, some like little dimple things around the kneecap. And to be frank, I thought it was a little crazy, but I was curious. So I signed up for that course. And literally the day before that course happened, I get a call from the organizer and said, "Hey, the hands-on person that was supposed to be doing the casting and the modification for your patient model canceled. Do you want to do that?" And I'm like, I don't want to say no, but I'm very new in my career. But I was like, what's the worst that could happen? I fail? Okay, who cares? And so I took that course and I followed literally everything that Dale told me to do. And this patient that was seen at a very prominent facility had starts crying when she puts on my socket. And I was like, oh no, this is not a good thing. This is not good. What is wrong? And she says, this is the first time that I'm comfortable in my prosthesis, that I've never had pain. And she had been trying to be fit by this group for about a year and had never been comfortable. And literally all I did was follow the recipe. Okay. So there was nothing magical about it other than I followed the recipe. Prosthetists are notorious for not following recipes. And from that time on, I started to become friends with Dale and Matt. I had already used their products as a technician. But then I became friends with them, and I also had the opportunity to teach with them, going to show other people the socket design. And it's changed literally thousands of people's lives here in the U.S. As far as patients go, and changed a lot of clinicians and the way they treat patients, and then ultimately affect patient outcomes. So I thought it would be very cool to have Dale on and share and hear his story. And I mean, it means that much to me, Dale, for you to be on for the 100th episode. And now really almost 20 years since I met you the first time, and made such a difference in my career and trajectory.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm very proud of what you've accomplished. Like you say, a lot of clinicians don't really like to follow the recipe. They have it changed before they get back home after a clinical meeting. And it really is an interesting profession at this point.
Okay, so Dale, so I remember a little bit because we've had I think Brenda's just the biggest fan of Coyote ever. We're having everybody, we'll interview everybody ever that works with you or on for you guys. So I know a bit about you guys. So I know that you you got involved with OMP as a patient first, right?
Correct.
And so could you tell us a little bit about that personal bit of your history? Let's say.
I was born with fibula hemimelia and had partial foot amputation or partial foot congenital on both limbs. And the left side was way worse. And as I grew taller, they stopped the growth in my right leg when I was 12 to equalize that. There really wasn't a lot of prosthetics in that era. 1958, 59 was pretty grim. So they opted to stop the growth of my leg to equalize my leg length. And that really set a chain of events in motion that was not very good. I functioned pretty well till I was 40 years old, but then that ankle on that left foot wore out. And I was faced with either fusing the ankle or amputating. And then I looked at, amputating below the knee, which is real dicey when you don't have a fibula. So I opted to do a Symes, and I traveled to Seattle and met with a group at Harborview Medical Center, Dr. Doug Smith, and Dr. Hansen as well was the ankle fusion guy, and I was trying to decide whether to fuse or whether to amputate. So we talked about the Symes, and Doug was very comfortable doing a Symes amputation. And then he happened to mention that, and oh, by the way, we could shorten your left femur as well to bring your knee centers back to, my knee centers were 2 inches off. So we could bring your knee centers back to level. So at that point, I was all in. So this was in the spring of 93. I had the Symes amputation. 9 months later, went back to Harborview and had a closed femoral shortening, which they were really excited to do because Boeing engineers had figured out for them how to shorten a femur internally, which was, I had no idea, but I didn't. When you're having surgeries like that, sometimes you don't want to know the details. And I wouldn't have done that today. I wouldn't.
Well, you don't want the doctor to be excited and to bring. It's bad when they bring all their friends and stuff when they're excited, and we're like, "Oh, is this Mr. Johnson? Oh, hi!" You know, you don't want him
like
excited. That's what I've learned. Yeah, exactly. You don't want a twinkle in his eye. A big day at the office. No, you don't. You want him bored. When I'm looking at his watch, saying, "Oh, golf is at 3." That's what you want.
You got it figured out.
Yeah. So and after that, did it stabilize for you? Did it get the situation get a lot better, a lot less painful? Were you able to do a lot more, or not really?
Oh, pain was gone. Wow. Pain was gone. So the other thing that occurred when I went back and had I fit a typical socket. I thought I was a whiz kid too, big old patellar bar and tight AP socket, and it was as my quad strength came back rather quickly, the pain around that patellar bar was obvious, and I realized what good salesmen we were in prosthetics. And then when I went back and had the closed shortening, that made my quad and hamstrings very weak. I had to walk with a cane for about, crutches first and a cane for about 6 months to get that strength back in the quad. But the amazing thing in that is that patellar pain, that patellar tendon pain vanished. So I realized that if you have a really weak quad, patellar pain is no issue. Patellar bar is no issue. And that really planted the seed for this socket design. So the Coyote socket design. Like I was telling Brent earlier, the socket I'm in now I've been in for 10 years, which in prosthetic terms, that's almost unheard of. But it doesn't hurt. So I do whatever I want. I honestly think if I hadn't had the surgery and the closed shortening both together, I'd be dead now. I would be inflammation, have extended inflammation until I would have died probably 10 years ago. So this is all a bonus to me.
And do you have that still? Do you have that still? Like every day is like, well, another one. That's cool. Like extra.
Oh yeah, I'm in the bonus round. So yeah, okay. I just certainly enjoy waking up. And another thing I did was in this process, I built shower prosthesis, real simple to do for Symes. And without that, my right knee and hip would have worn out sooner. I've had a hip replacement and a knee replacement on the right side, but I've avoided that all on the left. So I haven't had a major surgery since 2020. I had a C1, C2 fusion in my neck, but I haven't messed with anything in my lower extremities.
And then before those first years of your life, like those were actually kind of very low mobility, very painful, and also children can be very harsh with that. Did you feel that was kind of especially difficult for you, or have you never really worried as much about that? Or
no, as a kid, I mean, growing up with an amputation is way different than having an amputation when you're 60 years old. It's a shock at 60 or 50 or whenever. When you've had really good original equipment and then you lose some of it, that's a much bigger deal than a congenital like I was. And I didn't really know the difference. So I played basketball. I did all sorts of things. But then later, when I got a little older, that I started to have real issues with pain.
Okay.
So I want to explore a little bit on the socket design, and I think this is yours. I think this is where our listeners will find a lot of benefit, and some key points that Dale kind of glossed over quickly because this is his life every day. But so typically, when we're making a prosthesis, or in the school, like the school answer for a prosthesis, there under your kneecap, there's what's called a patellar bar. So it's like a depression that goes under the kneecap and pushes in to a tendon ligament that goes to the top of your tibia. And so that was the typical way that things have been done forever. And one of the interesting things is Dale was his own guinea pig, essentially. So Dale at the time was a prosthetist, and he made his own prosthesis and found that it was, as he gained strength, he was uncomfortable under the kneecap. So he ended up just cutting that away and saying, oh, that's more comfortable. And that is when the socket design of the RCR, but the Coyote socket design was born. So it was really born out of his experience, like he had learned, and this is the way that he was fitting patients and fitting even himself. And then he learned that, hey, maybe this isn't the right way to do things. And so one of the other interesting things that Dale glossed over a little bit was that he's been in his socket for 10 years. It's very common for patients to go through multiple replacement sockets over the course of 10 years because they have what's called atrophy, or you get smaller and smaller and smaller. One thing that's I found interesting in our practice, and I know Dale sees it in their practice, when you follow the recipe of the Coyote socket, you're going to see it's not necessarily good for business. Okay. So you're going to see less replacement sockets because you're actually letting the muscles fire and the blood flow go from the extremity, from the leg, all the way through. So typically, but under the knee and then behind the knee was pushed together, and that's what we call the AP, or the anterior posterior dimension. And but what people don't realize is behind the knee there is a vascular bundle, and that's where all your circulation happens, is behind your knee. And when you push in on that area, you limit the circulation, which then makes the leg get smaller, makes the muscles fire less, and then you end up getting another socket. When you do not do that, the opposite happens. So you potentially could have hypertrophy where the muscles start working again, and you don't end up doing replacement sockets. So is that a fair? What did I miss there, Dale?
Well, you do some. I mean, like if we fit many PTB socket wearers, and as soon as we did that, they had that hypertrophy. As soon as we fit them in the Coyote socket, we had that hypertrophy, which created too tight of a socket, and we had to do a socket replacement. It's not like we don't do socket replacements. I'm at signs, congenital signs, which is a different cat than a below the knee amputation. So we still do replacement sockets on a fairly regular basis for multiple reasons. With the transtibial amputee, there's all sorts of issues that have to be dealt with. But we had the opposite effect. We had the limb getting that popliteal area hypertrophying and made the socket way too tight. And so we had to make them a bigger socket, which is kind of just not intuitive in prosthetics. So.
And so did you first get involved in prosthetics because you're a patient yourself, or did you want to solve your own problems, everyone's problems? Why'd you get in this business?
That's really the reason I did it. And I certainly wasn't alone. When you went to the first national meetings I went to, you could tell it was a prosthetic meeting because there was just some horrible walkers. They were, just almost all the folks in the field were amputees. There weren't a lot of people that weren't amputees doing prosthetics. And it was a kind of a normal progression. I grew up, my dad was a contractor. We did building. I didn't realize fairly early on that I was never going to be able to do that long term. But it gave me a lot of insight into design and what you had to do to solve a problem. We did a lot of remodeling of homes, and that's all about problem solving. So that certainly helped me in my quest to become a prosthetist.
And then do you think, what unique insight, as both a prosthetist and also a patient, like, is there something you'd like to tell people who maybe, because now, like, a lot of people aren't patients, is there something you would like to tell people that they should pay more attention to, prosthetists? Like, hey, you should really be asking more about this, or equalizing more about what you understand to be pain, or is there certain things you think that people should be better at?
Well, I've heard lots of stories from amputees about being told they would get used to it when the socket was not comfortable. You'll get used to it. Well, that's bullshit. You really need to listen to your patients and really question the principles and theories that you were taught and got your A in school, but it doesn't help you fit a prosthesis. It's a really interesting process, fitting someone in a prosthesis, if you take the time to listen to them. And I realize that's getting harder and harder with how we are viewed in the market as a medical professional. But that's the bottom line. It's just don't ignore a complaint, and then really try to examine why are they having this problem. You built this socket. I would have got an A for it in school. Why are they having problem? Are they just, not very tough? What's going on? But no, listen to them. Just listen to them. That's all.
Okay. And then for you guys, at one point transition to becoming, well, you're still a practice, right? But you also make kind of tools and products for the industry as well. So as a product fabricator or whatever, like, or somebody making devices, do you have any advice as well that what these people should do more often?
Well, same process. You just question what's there. There were some big, during my time in prosthetics, there were some huge innovations. The gel liner, roll-on gel liner, the endoskeletal components, and the pin locking system, and then later vacuum and some other things. But those three, the pin lock system, the roll-on gel liner, were really two of the major things that occurred. But we would talk with lots of practitioners, and they would be, well, I only fit pin locks. All my patients get pin locks. Or the next guy was all his patients, they get suction. Well, that's not good. You can't all have the same thing. There are reasons for every type of prosthetic system, suspension system. So you really need to evaluate the patient and see what will work best for him, not you. And that's probably my nutshell device on prosthetic suspension systems.
If you look at these big improvements, let's say, And you look at stuff, we're really excited about 3D printing. How about yourself? You see it, is it going to be a really huge thing for the market, or you consider it relatively minor if we look at certain inventions, such as this gel liner, which of course was huge. What would you think the impact of additive or 3D printing is?
No, it will be huge. I've been around long enough. I've been in the practice over 50 years. So when I got out of school in 1974, it was pretty grim. There really weren't a lot of them. There were only 3 prosthetic feet. There really was not very many. A big innovation was getting rid of the side joint and lacer and having a PTB strap to hold your leg on. Those were the big innovations. And it was really pretty grim. But as things changed and that technology came along, I was fortunate to be able to witness the end of the wood leg era. So I had lots of patients that were in wooden legs, and most of them loved them because they had a thigh joint lacer that took all the weight, or a lot of the weight, off the end of their limb. And they, excuse me, they were really reluctant to try this great new technology that was a plaster cast, and then we make this cast and we make this perfect device to fit your limb in. And this evolved fairly quickly to having clear test sockets. This plastic technology came along, but a laminated socket was not a wood socket. And especially in the South, where the humidity was so high, they just loved them. And in the North, wood was a better insulator than plastic. So the socket was cooler and warmer, both, compared to a laminate socket. So I see the same thing happening in 3D printing. It's going to change, but it was very slow changing wood sockets over because people loved their wood socket, but they just ended up, that was technology. We're moving forward. This is what we're going to do. This is all really technical now. You're taking a cast, you're modifying that plaster model. And that's just really difficult, with, a way to manufacture. It's just has a lot more hurdles to go over and a lot more guesswork. The 3D printing, especially the way the scanners work, I made it. I have a socket that we made and scanned totally eliminated the plaster process as far as taking a plaster cast or fiberglass cast in my case, and then going right to a test socket. That's kind of unheard of. The way I make my socket, we had to go back to old school to finish this prosthesis, but it was much simpler than trying to take a mold. The scanning has gotten so good, and 3D printing is getting what it is now. It won't be next year. It's going to be way different. So as materials come along, technology comes along, it will change everything. And it's really hard when you are really good at one thing, like the old guys that were old guys when I was in the field that were making wooden sockets. They struggled to make a plaster model socket. So it's the same thing now.
And do you yourself use 3D printing at all, or you're like, let's leave it to the young kids and that's not for me?
I don't. No, I'm pretty much done. When you own a business, you lead, follow, or get out of the way. And it's my time in life to get out of the way. So that's, I don't really interact with them much unless they have a question about some older technique they need me to chime in on.
No, but this is the get out of the way is, I think, a really good point. And I was talking about a business today that is actually doing really badly because there's a founder that is not getting out of the way. That's just like looking over everybody's shoulder every 10 minutes. And that at one point, you do kind of have to let other people run what you helped build for so many years. So I think it'd be difficult.
Oh, absolutely. And that is hard. But it's necessary. Yeah, you can see it. You see it a lot. This is your baby. I've always told people I looked at it differently. I mean, the first 2 years I owned the business, I felt like I owned the business. After that first 2 years, it owned me. I worked too much, spent too much time there, and really had a hard time trusting people to come in and do the work I was doing. So I wasn't a great employer at times. So getting out of the way was one of the easiest things I did. But I still miss it, the challenge of it. It would be fun to, it's fun to continue to see how it's going to evolve and change as 3D printing becomes the benchmark. I mean, it's going to be the way things are done.
Hey, we're going to take a break right there, and I promise we'll be right back with Dale. I wanted to introduce another sponsor specifically for the 100th episode, and that is Comb Scan. Comb Scan is affordable and accurate and fits in your pocket on your iOS device. It is designed for the practitioner, by practitioners, and it allows you to capture precise 3D scans of your patients. From there, you download your scans from the Comb portal to prepare for CAD rectification and fabrication. And one of the greatest things is Comb Scan is approved for many central fabricators such as Cascade Dafo, Hersco Ortho Labs, High-Tech Custom Composites, O&P Solutions, and Limboss, along with many more. Check them out and hit them up for your 10-day free trial. So on that though, yes, you have moved out of the way, retired, what have you. But I mean, I still think that there's some foundational concepts, right? And the prosthetic. So 3D printing is not going to save the world. It's going to be very cool. And it's probably going to be introduce some things like gel liners has that allows people that aren't as skilled to make something that somebody can walk on. But like clinically, you still have to fit the patient. And I think that's what people miss a lot of times, regardless of the technology. Can you share some of your insight into that?
Well, the one thing that is interesting, I think, is the scan. So you take a scan, and when you took a plaster or fiberglass mold, you had something to work with. In a scan, it's just all an image. And if you're trying to carve a patellar bar in there and make a tight AP PTB socket, you're in big trouble, and your patient's in bigger trouble. So the thing that I'm proud of with our socket is it fits right in with 3D printing. It's an easy, I guess it's a hard concept, but it's an easy thing to transition to 3D printing, that technique. It's because you're really not trying to do anything goofy. One of the really goofy things in prosthetic sockets for below-knee amputees was the 5 to 10 degrees of flexion that the socket was put in. And this was to open up that gap for the patellar tendon bar to go in, because if they're in full extension, you can't put a bar in there. So I don't know how we could fool ourselves into believing that you could put a socket in flexion and not be dorsiflexing the foot. And so amputees walk like amputees. They didn't walk in normal gait because they couldn't. So that's another thing I'm really proud that we introduced, but it's not widely received. I can tell you that. It's kind of funny.
And if you look at how is so 50 years in business, a long time, and we talked a little bit about like the gel liners are big things that have changed, but you guys also have like a CFAB, right? And so from the manufacturing viewpoint, what has changed for them for from this wood era to going to carbon fiber and now 3D printing? What has changed on the CFAB business over that period?
Well, it certainly CFAB is in old school techniques. I'm talking old school like it was 5 years ago. Taking a wrap cast and a plaster model and moving forward, shipping that off to somebody And so what we receive are just negative model casts, and then we fill it, modify it, and do all that. And that's, if that cast is wrong, you really are swimming upstream. I mean, it's really hard. In 3D printing, if somebody can take a good scan and move forward, it's pretty simple and much more accurate. So it, and it's the current practitioners really aren't wanting to fabricate. It's, they want to put it in the mail like a pair of arch supports and get it back in the mail and fit it. And that's really, really difficult for the patient anyway, to come up with a really good product.
So if you had your let's just say, let's take the Coyote hat off, the business owner hat off, and you, Dale, the patient, and you had an opportunity to talk to, the incoming education of some magic wand stuff that you'd love to see about our industry moving forward. What would be some advice that you give them?
Well, it probably wouldn't be well received. I think we should close all prosthetic schools. The Academy of Orthotics Prosthetics should be a building, not an organization. We should be training practitioners ourselves, not turning it over to a really expensive operation for a university to set up a prosthetic school. And it's way too slow. You could have an academy in 3 cities in the U.S., and they would train patients via what we're doing today, a computerized system to educate folks, and then have hands-on sessions for certain things and certain devices. And you could to me, I would like to see practitioners certified really quickly, but more like a physician. So they're at the low end. They're not an orthopedic surgeon yet. They have to do a fellowship to do that. That's what I would rather see. And I would rather see us legislate our position in the market instead of getting patted on the head and kept requiring a physician to write notes for us and make that prescription before we can move forward. I think we should be able to evaluate patients and make a reverse referral, not have the physician refer to us, but we refer to them. I think they need to oversee that, but most physicians that do an amputation don't want to see the patient again. That's unusual, especially in rural areas. So that's not going to happen in my lifetime for sure. But if you want to, theoretically, you want me to tell you what I think I should be, that's what I think it should be.
So it sounds like more. So essentially taking the education into our own hands, almost like what like chiropractors have done.
Yeah, I would much rather we followed chiropractic and podiatry models than orthopedic surgeon model. We're not an orthopedic surgeon, never will be. So we need to understand what they do. But it's the chiropractic and podiatry legislated their own position in the market. So did physical therapy. They legislated their position in the market. And they went to insurance companies, showed them that, these patients get physical therapy, it's going to save you money. I don't think that's really occurred, but they believed it. And you can't hardly go to a doctor with, I had my neck fused, so I had to go to therapy first. That's just a knee-jerk reaction. When you get diagnosed with something, you're going to go to therapy before they're going to invest any time and do any surgery on you. So that's just legislation. That isn't something that somebody went, oh, this would be a better way to do it.
And I'm also really interested to look at the industry, right? So when you joined, was everybody just a separate little mom and pop store, let's say, and now you see all these all these giant companies? What do you feel like how the industry is changing?
Well, that's the corporate world. That's crippled America. The you know, the little town I grew up in, 5,000 people, had 3 car dealerships, 6 restaurants, 4 small grocery stores, and all that's gone. Now they have corporate this. Everybody gets their McDonald's, and then all these little mom and pops close. And that's really what's happening in prosthetics. We're no different than anybody else. As far as corporate efficiency and taking the money out of a local community, it hurts this country, but we're not going to go back to that ever. So I don't know how we deal with it, but yeah, it's not good. It was much, I think the patients had a much better relationship with the customer. We only go to hamburger places that are family owned, small hamburger places. We don't go to corporate places, but can't do that in prosthetics orthotics that easily. So it's just the way of the world.
I think that's a pretty interesting point, though, is that you never, like when you talk to somebody, specifically patients that use a prosthesis, it's always the clinician that they refer to. It's never the company. Like the relationship is always with the clinician. And so like, as much as what I would love to say, you know, we've done such a good job at East Point that people, you know, say, I'll see anybody at East Point to make my prosthesis or orthosis. But the reality is that people want to see a Brent or Paul or Audrey or Sophie. Like those people have the relationship and have the trust. And the idea of brand recognition for prosthetics and orthotics, other than it's becoming big in corporate, is still going to be, I want to see, you know, somebody at that office. It just happens to be named East Point or Hanger or whatever it is, but it still is super personal. And I think that's the part that's hard to see.
No, I agree completely. It is a one-on-one relationship. And when you find somebody that will do you a good job and listen to you, you're going to be loyal to that person, not necessarily the company. So that's a great point.
We just had a situation actually with a patient has Charcot-Marie tooth, and they were looking around their house, and I guess they were engaging in a discussion with their family members for, let's say, a birthday or something like that. And they were kind of going around like, what is the most important thing to you? And he was sitting down, didn't have his braces on. And he said, those 2 things sitting right there are the most important things in my life. They allow me to go to work. They allow me to go to the grocery store, have a life, all that. You can take everything except those 2 things. And I mean, it just goes to show how important that is. And you can't put a big banner over that other than it's a personal relationship for these devices.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's, I don't feel like I have a disability until I take my prosthesis off. Then that's a different deal. And it's just a science. I can stand on my amputation. I don't walk very well, but I can. But I use the shower prosthesis to walk around and take a shower. But for an above knee amputee or arm amputee or whatever, you're really limited once you take the device off, or Charcot-Marie tooth. You get up and mobile and you have freedom to move around. That's a big deal. And it's not something people want to give up. So there's people walk on a really uncomfortable prosthesis because it's better than not having one. It's a low bar to fit a good prosthesis, an acceptable prosthesis. It's a really low bar. People just want to move. And the 2% or 3% that are runners or high-end athletes, that's the small part of the market. It's the fun part, but it's a small part. The ones that are really important are the 80 or 90% that are, can't hardly function without the prosthesis.
Okay, so Dale, I find that very interesting that you talk about, the bar is very low to fit a prosthesis. And my whether it should or not, my mind goes to some of the research that's been done in orthotics and prosthetics, specifically some that has been done back in probably the 70s, when there was a lot of research done on amputees that were coming back from the war, right? So very healthy people, but otherwise had an amputation, and a lot of decisions were made regarding socket design from these healthy people that are taught in school. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's not the population that we see. And so, my thought when I see that and I hear the low bar, yes, it's a very low bar to fit somebody that's athletic, that tolerates a lot of pain, and that wants to get up and walk and wants to live their life. But it's a lot more difficult to fit somebody that, say, has some an aroma, sensitive skin, maybe a little bit of diabetes, and you cannot have skin breakdown. Can you just share some thoughts around that?
Well, I say it's a low bar because, just get up and hop around for a little bit on one leg, and then think, well, what if I had to hop and I couldn't hop? I had both legs amputated. Just to get up and walk, it can feel pretty bad, and you're gonna soldier on, and that kind of looking at those healthy patients that started before Vietnam. That started World War One and Two. World War One, we didn't do much. They got 2 prostheses from the VA. That was automatic. They get 2 prostheses. And then in World War II, they did some of that for a while, and it got really complicated as far as where you served and all that. But that's where really all of the real engineering thought in prosthetics came in World War II, after World War II. And that's when we had engineers at Berkeley tell us how we should fit a prosthesis. And that really, they had no idea in the world. They were just looking at a skeletal model. And above the knee, they really weren't looking at wounds and scars and burns and all kinds of issues that we have to deal with. They were just looking at healthy tissue and how to build a socket around that. So it's really really not reality. But we clung to those concepts for 50, 60 years, and it's 70 years. And it's just bizarre to me that we haven't done our own research. And the research today and prosthetic fitting today is on L codes. You're fitting by L code. You're not fitting by what the patient needs. You're fitting by economically, how can I fit a for-profit socket on this guy or gal? And how many L codes can I add to this to make my car payment or building payment or whatever, or get my salary increase because my production is up? That's sad. That's just sad. And that's one reason it's really easy to walk away. But I'm not young like you. So,
well, one other question I had for you is the role of the surgeon in a good outcome. I mean,
That's a good point, and that's why it should be kind of a reverse role. And that's, the big corporate companies have the money and the time to go after and get the ear of the surgeon. And that's, and then like Doug Smith told me once, we were talking about amputation surgery, and he said, if you go to an orthopedic meeting and you go to a talk on amputation, there is nobody in there that doesn't have gray hair. There are no young guys. When hip joints and knee joints came along, they had no interest in doing amputations. They didn't give it up. And it's unfortunate that there wasn't a subspecialty of orthopedics vascular that didn't do amputations, and strictly amputations. But that's not practical in rural America or anywhere else, I guess. You could do it in a big city, but, and it doesn't mean anything. I mean, there are techniques in surgery come along like the Erdl that probably are almost unheard of now. It died in 1950 after he introduced it because it's so hard to do the way he did it. But later on, when he and his sons reintroduced it, it caught on really quickly. But just like prosthetists, orthopedic surgeons start finding shortcuts to cut down a 2.5 hour surgery like Erdl designed it. And they did all kinds of things that created real problems for patients. So it's unfortunate we don't have a better relationship with orthopedic surgeons, or there isn't another surgical specially introduced that specializes. I mean, like a PM&R doc would be a great guy to do an amputation, but they're not surgeons. Why not? Why not? You're dealing with the problems after somebody else does the surgery. And I would guess even in today's world, there are less than 50% good amputations. It's a real thoughtful, hard thing to do. I was fortunate to do a meeting with both Sig Hansen and Doug Smith, deciding whether to do a fusion or do an amputation. And so when Matt came along, I still had those guys to rely on. Didn't need Sig Hansen. Matt wouldn't be a fusion. But, being able to talk with Doug and really have a good relationship like that was huge. I would have been smart to move my practice to Seattle and saw a lot more of his patients. But it is what it is.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I think we've got a episode coming up on just what the role of the surgeon, as well as specifically for transfemoral gait and surgery, like how the role of the IT band is not talked about like it should be, and is actually the cause of a lot of issues for transfemoral patients. And so I think that's what I wanted to get through to. You've been very successful. You had with your situation, because you had a good relationship with the surgeon. They listened. You guys came up with a plan together, not only for the Symes amputation, but for the closed femoral shortening. Those are all things that are, those are discussions that should be had, but that probably the majority of people are not having. And it does have a direct impact on what your outcome is going to be.
Yeah, if I were an orthopedic surgeon, and I had a patient that had a crush injury to his lower leg, and I had to do an above knee amputation, but he had good vascular supply to his knee, I would do a knee dysartic every time, kind of a high level knee dysartic, and be like a 2-stage surgery, and then I'd shorten his femur 4 inches, depending on the height of the patient. So they had a really good in-bearing limb, and wouldn't really need any kind of ischial weight bearing. It would be simple, but that's not the case. Nobody's even gonna suggest that to somebody, except me, and I don't count. So there are things that they do that really, I don't know how many amputations I've seen that the fibula was longer than the tibia. Really? Really? This is, But when you see a surgery, when you see how surgery is done, they don't see the patient. They've got them covered up. And so they open a little window and they measure down with their hand or some way and determine when they're going to do a BK. And they're all the same length. They're all the same length from tibial plateau to the end of the amputation. Well, that's stupid. There's, but that's the way it is. Like I say, now there's nobody coming in that wants to do amputations. Do you see any hurdles anymore?
So there is a surgeon here locally that does them. I would say that really a lot of the talk is what opened up this whole surgery talk is that surgeons get under $1,000 for an amputation, so they want to be in and out very quickly.
But they're not advocating for that. They're not advocating.
No,
for
so
that.
But this is the interesting part that's becoming part of the conversation is how can you do, if you do an amputation, how do you do limb reconstruction? So, and that's where there is more money available to surgeons, and that's how you get some of the interest into, hey, these patients that are diabetic dysvascular, that how do we get the most life out of them? Well, it's to get them up and going, those that want to. Well, how do we do that? Well, we've got to take away the issue of a poor surgery with them to ensure a better outcome. So there, it is considered kind of osseointegration, but it's inside, so you don't have the stoma coming out, but you can have weight bearing on the end of like a femur, or they're doing some on the tibia as well, and it closes up the what is it, the intermedullary cavity. I'm not a surgeon or a doctor, but it's pretty amazing, and it gives a place for the IT band to connect. So you continue with the adduction of the limb, and so I think some of that stuff is very interesting because,
well, the adductor longus is really the thing they miss in transfemoral. The adductor longus keeps that limb in abduction, and as soon as you cut that limb off, I wouldn't worry about the IT band as much as I would the adductor longus. That's got to be osteointegrated. You have to really attach that no matter what. You have to attach that thing somewhere to keep that limb muscularly balanced. That's, to me, that's the key. We do these really elaborate socket designs, CAT cam and Savalich and all this bullshit just to keep that adduction angle. Well, all you had to do was keep that adductor longus,
which is why those Nidus artics do so well.
Have a problem
because you got a place for it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and long AKs are easy because that thing's still intact.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your journey with Matt, too, on kind of the evolution of the socket design and how we have, believe it or not, a lot of even parents that have kids that are have an amputation or facing an amputation, and they sometimes will listen in to what is some of the latest or some of the things that parents can do to make sure their kiddos excel at life. So I'd love to hear, a little bit of your journey with Matt for sure.
Well, it was really not something I wanted to take my work home with me. So when Matt was born, it was a shocker. I actually dropped out of the field for 2 years. It was, and then I realized that I had to be involved with this. So I really waited too long. I met with Pellicor in Chicago, and what's the guy in Wisconsin, Critter. I met with those guys, and then went to University of Oregon and met with the docs there, and they wanted to fuse his hip. And then I had to start doing research and really understand PFFD and how I wanted. The only real biggest mistake I made was waiting too long. We didn't amputate the foot till he was 10, and he didn't grow as tall as my other son. So he ended up almost a needus artic with very little clearance. But that talking to those guys, well, like Pellicor, he was doing Van Ness procedures. So I said, no, I've been reading some. I said, there's no internet. So some of these turn back. I said, how do you keep it from doing that? I said, oh, you don't. You just redo it. Cut them again, turn it. And then some guys that could wedge cuts and lock it in a mortise. And yeah. So I said, okay, I'm not doing a bad. You look at everything. When you're faced with it, you can do anything theoretical. That's fun. When it's staring you right in the face, you got to make those decisions. That was the biggest mistake, was not doing it quickly enough. And then he had a real angulated limb. It was really, and talking to Doug Smith after my amputation, it was easy to discuss with him how to change that. So he had this flexible rods. Well, I had no idea what a flexible rod was, but that's what Matt has. They did flexible rods and straightened his limb out. So like when in his first sockets you couldn't see the bottom of the socket. You looked down his socket, you couldn't see the end of it. It was around the corner. And so that really was the one surgery that really helped get him the gait that he's got now, and where he can function and how he can function. And he and anything you can do, convince the surgeon to do, that will help make fitting easier, is good for me or you. But it's a dicey thing to start talking to surgeons about how they could maybe improve this amputation. It's really not something they want to touch. Way too much litigation and that bullshit. And that's just the reality of life. But there is so much that can be done surgically, pre-op, post-op, and then revision surgery. Those are all things that I would think half of all amputations should have a revision.
So yeah, and then Matt, went on high level competition stuff, and I think you guys kind of pioneered the way for a lot of the current even triathletes in the way they think about sockets, components, and all that stuff that you guys had to hand make for Matt to be successful on his journey.
Oh yeah. Matt won 5 world championships in a row. And he did that because he didn't have a knee joint in his prosthesis. His running prosthesis weighed like 2 3/4 pounds. And it was just a pylon. And you had to get it at the right angle. You had to have a foot that would have some energy return. But he ran with a whip gait, it'd adduct and bring it back in. But he just smoked people that were trying to run with a knee. And now they've made some knees and they've done all kinds of stuff. But the one real issue in prosthetics is all the research is done on components. This new computerized foot, what a waste of money. I would love to see all that money go to prevent diabetes. As the people that are going to use $1 million foot are very few and far between. That's but that's the frustrating part with reimbursement.
It's interesting. We have this discussion a lot, especially with our young athletic patients and such. They see the Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff, and they say, I want this computerized knee, computer this and that." And luckily we have some patients that are very active, and we say, hey, we've had some patients that have tried all this stuff and they always go back to a total knee and some sort of dynamic foot, right? If you're a transfemoral patient. But the cool thing is that having the opportunity to demo some of that stuff, especially now, so they can make their own decisions. But like, I just had a situation with an insurance company that wouldn't cover a patient for a second prosthesis for sports, but they would cover, a $50,000 microprocessor knee for his everyday leg instead of, we were looking for something with a total knee. So definitely way less than that. And trying to have that discussion of like, hey, you're actually going to pay more for one prosthesis and have somebody that's still not able to exercise or what have you than for this. It's just that conversation is, it is maddening for sure.
Well, we got nobody in our corner. Historically, orthopedic surgeons became orthopedic surgeons were anointed. They didn't have to do anything. They just had to have somebody that had gone through the process paperwork wise and become an orthopedic surgeon to anoint them as an orthopedic surgeon. There was no real formal education. And that certainly was the same way prosthetics was. You had an orthopedic surgeon or even a surgeon make you a CPO. And it wasn't, but it created such a synergy between the surgeon and the practitioner because we were important to them at that time. All sorts of back braces. There was nothing prefab. You had to fabricate everything. So they really relied on us. They don't even know who the hell we are now. They just have no concept. You want to get some cute gal to come in and show me about the latest total knee? I'm all in. I got not tons of time to go over this, and you can fly me somewhere and do the seminar and make an extra 20 grand to do the seminar. And, it's just a different world, but that's.
Yeah. So just like knowing, looking at history, right? And as we're moving forward, what are some, other than 3D printing, what are some exciting things that you see moving into the field? And where do you find that there might be some, for those that are listening, some white space of, hey, people are not doing this. It may be something that you want to look at.
Well, I've tried to convince Matt that, we do some central fab, but most of it's in our AFO stuff. He could be crazy busy just doing our sockets. Teach somebody how to do the scan, set them up with the scanner, and then build sockets for them all day. And it would be easy. I mean, it's to take a scan of a limb and do it properly. I think entry level wise, if you're going to get into 3D printing, learn how to scan and get that image and have somebody else print it for you. Then, and you guys can do that. I mean, you could be crazy busy doing just that. But that's when they try to do everything you know how much there is involved in 3D printing. I mean, there's a lot involved and a learning curve like everything else in the world. But to be able to scan and take a decent scan, and then the other thing, I disagree with what we're doing now. I wouldn't do a clear test socket except on AKs, and I'm not sure I'd do it then. There's not much you can learn, and there's other materials that you don't have to worry about it snapping in half. So I wouldn't. I'd go like Belgium does. They don't get paid for test sockets. You just have to make a socket like we used to, and that's way more important to me. And that's what I would do, is just learn to scan, have somebody else make your sockets for you for a while before you make that investment, because it gets really complicated, and you can buy a junk machine for very not much money, or you can spend thousands of dollars. So it's really not, I don't know how, I mean, there's not a good way to do. If you try to, looks like to me, if you try to bite it all off and do your own fabrication, you're just setting yourself up for failure. If you learn how to scan, get somebody building sockets for you, like Brent Wright, then you can move quickly. And if you want to get your own stuff, then you have an investment. You know, it's just not going to sit there and draw dust or break down. You don't know what to do with it. You know, it'd be just frustrating. So
On the scanning side, if you're able to share, so I know that previously when we were scanning, we would do or when we were casting, we do a high tension fiberglass cast, and I still do it that way, and I scan the inside of that cast. When you're talking direct scanning, are how like where do you see that going? Because I do think the high tension is important, but I know that there's probably ways to predict that, right?
well, I'll just use myself and Matt as an example. Congenital limbs are a different deal. It's way different than a normal human anatomy that's been amputated. There's two categories there. And those congenitals, like with me, it was really simple. And I bought some black socks, uh, kind of lycra socks, and pulled that up over my limb. We scanned it. We really, in a Symes, you don't have to modify it. There was really no modification. And then what we did, I didn't even try it on. I just filled it with plaster, got a plaster model, put a Kesey cone on it, and laminated a socket, and it was done. I didn't touch it. It was, so that's just the difference. I mean, if I had taken a mold like I normally do, that would have created, now fill a mold with plaster and modify that. Now you're really into the guesswork area of prosthetics. And to me, scanning takes the guesswork out. But you can screw yourself up if you're trying to modify a socket like a like a PDB off of a scan. You are
Yeah.
in big trouble. Your patient's in
Yeah.
big trouble.
No, I think that's interesting, and going direct is definitely I see that happening, and I think it really just matters, and it goes back to the surgery, right? If you have a poor surgery and say they have a lot of tissue at the end or something, and you've got them holding their leg out, and you're scanning, and that tissue is kind of falling, and then you're making guesswork digitally. So it's how do you get that limb, and it's similar to what we've said all along with the RCR method, is how do you get that limb into a position where you can cast it so it looks like it's supposed to when you're weight bearing. And I think that's going to be the trick as we go to direct scanning.
Yeah, I think your method, and we don't do it. We're still trying to direct scan and move forward. And that's really hard. I totally on all in and having an internal scan and taking a fiberglass mold for a BK. puts you hands-on to the patient, which in Europe and in Asia, hands-on is a big deal. I mean, they really talk about when they see a patient in the hospital, they touch them. They're not just talking to them or looking at their computer while they talk to them. They actually touch the patient, and that's a big connection. And that's you can't do that with a scan because you can't touch them. You have to, so that
Yeah.
I mean, I think the scan for a BK is really important, and then you're closer to what your shape wants to be. Then you can scan the inside of that mold, and you're really close. You may not be perfect, but you're really close without having to put a patellar bar in. Keeping that wide AP, a natural shape and full extension. That's just simple. It's just simple.
You would appreciate this, Dale. So a friend of mine, I've known him for a long time. I said, you really should just check out the course online. And he's been in the field a little while. And it's probably a couple months after that. He goes, Brent, I watched that course. And I did it with a patient that's always been a very difficult patient for me. And the patient got up and could not believe that he didn't have any pain. And I was like, isn't it great? Like, it's a recipe. Like and it just makes sense. And I'll never forget, like when I went to go modify the socket when we were doing that short course, and you would always say, do not touch it. You're going to screw it up. And so, it's like, you don't touch it and you're really, really close. And I love that about it. So, and for our listeners, just to give a little bit of description of what we're talking about, and you have the opportunity to go to Coyote Prosthetics, and they have a continuing ed course. The socket is called the Stable Flex course, but the overarching idea is you want to take a high tension fiber, this is for transtibial patients, a high tension fiberglass cast. And when I say high tension, it is you hear the fiberglass ripping and you back off a little bit. And then what you do not want to do is wrap super tight around the cut end of the tibia and fibula. Just so most of your tension is just right above the cut end of the tibia and fibula, and you get full contact on the distal end. But you've now created a relief and you've ensured contact on the tibia. And I think the other part that I think is really important that Dale has always said, it's total contact on equal pressure. So it's okay to put pressure in the pressure tolerant areas, but you want to continue with total contact. And you might have some small reliefs, but it's not a relief in the traditional sense where you're putting this massive relief for an area because you're controlling the whole volume. And so I really think that's it made a big difference for our practice for sure.
Yeah, it's really just simple. And the more education you have and the older you are in prosthetics, the harder it is to shift, to switch, do something. But I really think the education process in prosthetics is really pretty poor right now. That when we had three schools and they were dedicated to prosthetic orthotics, that was one thing, and they had the short-term courses and then the long-term courses. But now to have a BA degree or a BS degree, whatever, it's just taken too long to get to that end run. And now you've got a guy that's got debt and he needs a salary. And so it really didn't improve us as a profession. Let me put it that way. I don't think,
Yeah.
But and prosthetics is a minuscule expense in the world of third-party payers compared to everything else. It is peanuts, not even a full bag. It's just peanuts. But what really makes it could be even less if you didn't have patients going from one practitioner to the next, to the next, to the next. Most revisions are done for that reason. They're unhappy with where they're at. And the trouble in prosthetics is we should legislate that they are totally covered. So becoming an amputee doesn't make you wealthy. So, and that 20% is a big deal. And then you can play the game and they don't have to pay, but then you have to write it off after they become a bad debt.
And then then you gotta talk to your banker, and the banker's like, "What's going on here?" And then they get upset at the insurance companies. It's just like this annual event, owning a O&P clinic.
It is. It owns you after a while.
So, thank you so much for being on this episode, Dale. Thank you so much for your insight and everything. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
You bet. Nice meeting you.
All right. Thank you so much. And Brent, I know you enjoyed this.
Oh, this was great. And just hearing a little bit more of the history and the why behind it. And I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of this.
Awesome. And I hope you guys enjoyed listening to another episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast with Brent Wright, Yoris Peels, and you. Have a great day.
Hey, and that wraps up the 100th episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast. A big thank you to Dale Perkins for sharing his expertise and insights today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss out on future episodes. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next time on the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast.